While Moscow lies about wanting peace, Ukraine is hitting Russia where it hurts. Ukraine is striking the systems that keep the Russian war machine alive. And not just the trenches at the front, but the ports, the factories, and the energy infrastructure deep inside of Russia. Novorossiysk on the Black Sea is now one of the most important targets. Satellite imagery shows a sharp drop in tanker activity at the Sheskharis terminal after a Ukrainian drone strike. 4 tankers have been loading there. Now, only 1 remains. Oil loading arms and manifolds were damaged, forcing a reduction in exports. Novorossiysk and the Caspian Pipeline Consortium can move up to 2.2 million barrels of oil per day. That's about 2% of global supply. Every successful strike raises risk premiums, scares insurers, and squeezes the Kremlin's main source of hard currency. But deeper inside of Russia, Ukraine is hitting the industrial clusters that make Russia's war machine operate. Drone strikes carried out the Progress enterprise in the Cheboksary Republic, more than 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles from the front, was very successful. That site manufactures the Kometa antennas that protect Russian drones from Ukrainian electronic warfare. It also builds relay protection systems and electronic components for Russia's power and control infrastructure. But closer to Moscow, there was something even better. Ukrainian drones are striking major energy sites. A recent attack knocked out part of the thermal plant that feeds the capital. Tens of thousands briefly lost heat and electricity. Russian officials called it one of the most serious energy blows since the invasion began. Ukraine is proving that Russia cannot keep this war at a safe distance. Ports are under attack. Factories are under attack. Power plants are under attack. Russia is being pushed toward negotiations by math, not by goodwill. But inside the Kremlin, that pressure has split the elites. The military sees the battlefield losses and wants a pause. The FSB sees political leverage in prolonging the conflict. Technocrats see a collapsing budget and want stabilization. Oligarchs see the contracts and the corruption that is flowing from this war and want to see it continue. Russia's war finance won't allow it, but the fight today inside the Kremlin is going to change what happens next. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post and a national security advisor. The situation in Russia is quite interesting to see today because what is happening and what we read in the news about peace talks is quite a bit different than what you might believe. The press usually portrays this as some sort of an agreement by Russia. They have these maximalist demands, which they hope to see fulfilled. But the truth of the matter today is that the Kremlin very obviously does not want peace. The Kremlin is eager to continue this war. And the reason is simple. The logic of the Kremlin is quite a bit different than the logic of the rest of Russia. In the interest of Russia, it would be best to end the war. They simply cannot afford this. Their economy cannot sustain this. However, there are people at the very top who are making lots of money in this war. And that's why today they would like to see the war continue. And they're actively sabotaging efforts to bring a conclusion to this war. So let's dig into this, what the real situation is in Russia, how these attacks carried out by Ukraine are changing the dynamics in Moscow, and what is likely, realistically, to happen next with the peace talks. But first, before we go on, in this critical time, as Ukraine right now, more than ever, needs to get its voice to the world, I ask you to do me a favor. Help us get the truth from what is happening here in Ukraine, where I am, to the world. And to also get out the truth about Russia's lies, the fact that the aggressor state is not interested in peace. You can help me by simply liking this video, subscribing to this channel, and considering becoming a channel member today. And please do leave your comments below what you think about today's video. So let's dig into this. First, we have to understand why Russia's technocrats want peace. The easiest thing to point out is that the finance ministry is pushing the VAT tax up 22%. Now, analysts say it will pull in about $16 billion from household budgets. Inflation, though, is expected to rise as a result. Ordinary Russians will pay more for food, for fuel, and for basic goods so that the state can finance this war. The 2026 budget is being militarized on a historic scale. About 38% of total federal spending, roughly $164 billion, goes to defense and security. Tens of billions fund the army, the police, the security services, and the prisons. Social spending is squeezed to keep the war machine running and the elites happy. However, today, the situation for Russia is not easy. It's very complex. Look at the recruitment numbers. Right now, Russia is struggling to find more soldiers, and that's despite the fact that they're spending more than $25 million a day on enlistment bonuses. That's more than $9.3 billion per year. But even with that, they can't fill the ranks. And that's why today they're recruiting foreigners. Over 18,000 have been recruited from 128 countries. Now, you might wonder, why can't Russia afford this? Well, we've discussed before what's going on in the oil industry, what's going on with the arms industry, but there's something else. Consider the $300 billion in Russian central bank assets that are immobilized in G7 and EU jurisdictions. Most of this is stuck in European countries, and so it cannot be used. It cannot plug the deficit or stabilize the economy. The peace plan talks are tied directly to these frozen reserves. Washington and Brussels are discussing using that $300 billion for Ukraine's defense and reconstruction. One U.S. concept envisions $100 billion in reconstruction contracts for American companies. Now, for the technocrats in Russia, when they look at this, what do they see? They see warning lights. Oil terminals are burning, factories are burning, power plants are also burning. The VAT tax is going up 22%, and $300 billion abroad might be used against Russia. For the military, the message is simple. Russia cannot run this deficit war indefinitely. The system will eventually break. For the FSB, though, and the oligarchs, the incentives are different. A higher VAT tax means more money inside of a corruption-heavy system. War budgets means opaque contracts and kickbacks. Reconstructions funded by frozen assets could become a new source of profit. The technocrats read the spreadsheets, and the military, the FSB, the oligarchs read the contracts. All four factions benefit from corruption, but each sees a different path forward. A peace plan shaped in Moscow is not designed to end the war. The U.S.-backed peace initiative did not begin from a neutral draft. As we know, it looks like it was passed on from the Russians to the White House. That document includes demands that Ukraine had already rejected, including ceding territory in the east and in the south, locking in Russian influence over the occupied territories for years to come. Now, what's the fascinating part that many people don't realize is that this decision by Moscow, what they're seeking to do, it's part of a larger strategy. It's not about peace. What's interesting to note is that Kremlin aides Kirill Dmitriev and Yuri Ushakov, they've been pretty open about what they're seeking. They've demanded maximal returns for Russia from the beginning. They're not seeking compromise. They're simply seeking to raise the opening price. And what they're saying essentially is that what Russia takes by force becomes its starting position. Now, here's a problem with that. It's not as simple as even that. It's more complex. For the military, the FSB, and the oligarchs, a formal settlement is actually a dangerous outcome. It threatens the war contracts that enrich them. Remember, there is no one in Russia's elites that is serving Russia's interest. They are serving what is in their personal economic interest. This is about corruption. As we've discussed many times before, if we want to understand Russia well, it's important to understand what is Russia's interest and what is the elite's interest are two different things. The elites don't care about Russia. Vladimir Putin is chief among them. What he is doing is not good for Russia. It's not healthy for Russia. And the technocrats tell him that. They tell him it's time to end the war. We can't afford to continue doing this. But the corrupt elites realize this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make as much money as possible. And they are very keen to continue doing that. And so they will do what they can to sabotage any peace deal. Now, it might seem totally irrational and crazy that right now, perhaps a month before the Russian economy starts to have really significant problems, and perhaps 2 months before the wheels come off the bus, that they are continuing this fight. But what's behind that? It's as simple as that. There are some inside the Kremlin that understand having peace talks is useful. They understand at least giving the illusion of peace talks can help get the Americans on their side. But the reality is that there is no interest in peace. They wish to continue making money. Now, the leak that we saw regarding Witkoff shows how the FSB is trying to sabotage the peace process from within. Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's envoy, met Putin's team inside an FSB monitored environment. And after these meetings, he held a call with Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov. Now, on the call, Witkoff flattered Putin. He discussed selling territorial concessions, talked about which occupied regions could be framed as really Russian, and they had generally a positive conversation. That call, though, did not simply leak. Transcripts and audio reached Bloomberg and other outlets. The trail, though, does not point to Kiev. It points not to Brussels nor to Washington. It points to Russia's compromat networks. Ushakov's reaction revealed the motive. He called the publication unacceptable. He said the leak appeared aimed at disrupting diplomacy. He did not blame Ukraine, though, or the West. He did, however, hint that maybe someone inside of Moscow was trying to blow up the negotiations. But afterwards, Kirill Dmitriev tried to discredit the story as well. He said that parts of the transcripts were fake. He said the context had been distorted. He tried to cloud the waters without even denying the conversation himself. The pattern here is pretty obvious. The FSB cannot openly block talks that Putin has ordered. So it must use sabotage to make sure that they don't succeed. It must manufacture scandals that hit the U.S. political scene. It prevents any settlement that threatens its power and its corruption networks. They did not leak the tapes in order to stop the war. They leaked it to stop a peace process that they do not control. And that, in fact, directly relates to what we are seeing go on here in Ukraine as well. You've obviously heard about the major corruption scandal in Ukraine. Now, of course, that needs to be fully prosecuted. There's no doubt about it. But let's ask yourself, where do those tapes come from? How do we know about this corruption? Well, the answer is very simple. A guy named Andrei Derkach. Derkach had been a Ukrainian politician. His father, in fact, had been the director of the SBU, the Security Service of Ukraine. But Derkach himself was an active Russian spy. In fact, the U.S. Treasury has designated him as a Russian agent, and he worked for Russian intelligence for years. After the full-scale invasion, he fled to Russia and is now a senator in Moscow. But what's interesting, this entire corruption scandal, where does it come from? What is the origin? The origin is very simple. They are recordings from Derkach's office. So one might ask, how does the Ukrainian corruption scandal have to do with Russia? Well, Derkach was serving the Russian state. He recorded these conversations. Moscow chose to make sure that these conversations were made public, and that was done to discredit Ukraine. Now, of course, I do not argue that the tapes most likely are real, but what is the motive to release them is the question. The political science question is, what is the motive? And that is very simple. Russia is doing what it can to make sure that Ukraine is not taken seriously, that Ukraine is put into a weaker position in the eyes of the Americans. And that's part of a larger operation here. Russia is trying to influence global events to make sure they work in their interests. The information space is something that Russia excels at. They invest incredible sums of money to make sure that they dominate narratives. So imagine this. Derkach, an active Russian agent, was engaged in massive corruption inside Ukraine. The FSB let him keep that money. There was no problems. And that reflects what we see in Russia itself. Because in Russia, we do not see a war economy. We see a theft economy that's protected by Russian intelligence, corrupt military networks, and technocrats under pressure, as well as oligarchical interests that continue to be served. But war is also a franchise. Consider what we saw in the case of the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group exposed the financial logic of Russia's war model. After the mutiny 2 years ago, Putin admitted that the state had paid the Wagner Group about $1.1 billion in just 1 year. What's incredible is that war in Ukraine, Syria, Africa are all run like franchises. The Kremlin provides political cover and a budget. Wagner provides manpower and brutality. Profits are shared among the insiders. So when Prigozhin marched on Moscow, the regime killed him. Not the business model. Those functions moved under the defense ministry and the security services. The military, the FSB, the oligarchs all learned a lesson. Do not challenge the Kremlin. Always keep the money flowing. And today, they apply the same logic to peace talks. Use diplomacy as theater. Use leaks and corruption networks to control the narrative. Keep the war going as long as it pays. However, the real fight today is not the one between Ukraine and Russia. The real fight today that is deciding the outcome of this war is the one happening today in the Kremlin, where the clans are fighting with each other. However, at the same time, their fight is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening while Ukraine is proving with every strike that Russia cannot sustain this war. Novorossiysk is under attack and tanker traffic is shrinking. We saw plants more than 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles, from the front being attacked. Power stations near Moscow are under attack. Russia's war machine is losing assets far from the battlefield. Russia comes to the table today because the numbers are ugly. Oil and gas revenues are under pressure. VAT is headed towards 22%. Recruitment is costing tens of millions of dollars per day. But inside the Kremlin, the struggle is about survival and the spoils of war. The military wants funds and manpower. The FSB wants control and political leverage. Technocrats want a ceasefire before the system collapses. Oligarchs want to see a war economy that further enriches them. That is why the peace plan looks like a Kremlin document. That is why the Witkoff call was shaped and then leaked. That is why the Derkach network stole more than $100 million and then leaked the tapes. That is why every time talks begin, there is immediately a scandal. Putin is not fighting for Russia. He's fighting to keep these groups aligned through corruption. As long as these factions continue to profit, They will treat peace as another front. They will leak more, they will sabotage more, and they will do whatever they can to delay the process. They will weaponize U.S. politics, European hesitations, and Ukrainian exhaustion. Ukraine understands this reality. That is why it is keeping its war effort going. It is continued to attack the oil terminals, the factories, and the power grid inside of Russia, to raise the price of war for the people who run it, to force the internal system in Moscow to pay for its own corruption. This war will not end with a signed document in a neutral city. It will end when the cost of war for Russia's military, the FSB and the Technocrats, is simply too high. But until then, Moscow will use the word peace as a tool, and Ukrainians, Russians, and Europeans will all ultimately pay for this. What we see today in Russia is nothing less than criminal oligarchy. The Kremlin is nothing more than a criminal gang. And if we understand it as being some sort of a state actor, we are already mistaken. That is not the way to think of them. If you understand them like a mafia that is looking at this war as being something necessary, something that's producing profits, why would they fear? Why would they be against this war? War profiteering has made many rich people. So today, the Russians are not seeking peace. However, they are seeking to discredit Ukraine. They are seeking to get Western political leaders to believe that they want peace, and at the same time, betraying them for their confidence. Thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. And consider becoming a channel member today. And please do leave your comments below and share this video with others. And at the end of this video, when you see the options for other videos come up on the screen, please click one. It really helps us with the algorithms. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.